What if one day, your home suddenly turned against you? Not in the abstract, not in the metaphorical sense, but legally, officially, irrevocably. What if the country you once called your own, the place where you built your life, your career, and your public identity, suddenly told you, you are no longer welcome here? This is not a hypothetical question. For Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, it has become a terrifying reality. King Charles, in a move that has stunned royal watchers, political analysts, and millions of everyday citizens around the globe, has reportedly revoked Meghan Markle's UK visa. The very idea sounds almost cinematic, like a plotline pulled straight from a thriller or a high-stakes political drama. But the reality is far stranger and far more chilling. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine waking up one morning to find that the country you thought of as home has suddenly become foreign. The rules have changed overnight, and the consequences are immediate. For Meghan, this is not just about travel. It's about identity, freedom, and power. It's about the invisible, iron-bound mechanisms of monarchy and state, mechanisms most people only read about in history books or see in fiction. And it's about what happens when an individual, no matter how famous or influential, challenges or even appears to challenge those mechanisms. The first question most people ask is simple. Why? Why now? Meghan Markle has been in the public eye for years, under intense scrutiny, both celebrated and vilified in ways that few of us can truly understand. She married into one of the most scrutinized, tradition-bound institutions in the world. She understood, at least in theory, the sacrifices and compromises that life as a royal entails. Yet, even with all that knowledge, she could not have predicted this. King Charles's decision was sudden, unprecedented in modern memory, and carries implications that extend far beyond a single individual. To understand the gravity of this situation, it's essential to trace the steps that led here. Meghan's journey to royalty was extraordinary, almost cinematic in its arc. Born in Los Angeles, California, Meghan seemed destined for the spotlight. Her acting career, marked by her breakout role in the television series Suits, earned her international recognition. She was a woman of ambition, charisma, and determination, navigating an industry defined by its harsh lights and unforgiving cameras. But even in Hollywood, Meghan faced challenges. Discrimination, intrusive media coverage, and the constant need to navigate her own identity in a world that demanded she conform. Then came the engagement, the fairy tale wedding, the entry into a world where every word, gesture, and appearance is recorded and analyzed by millions. The public adored her at first, fascinated by the idea of an American actress marrying a British prince. Yet, the honeymoon phase, both literal and metaphorical, was short-lived. The scrutiny intensified. Every action was dissected. Every decision, from the color of her dress to the tone of her statements, became a subject of debate, criticism, or outright condemnation. The palace, while steeped in tradition, is not immune to the pressures of modern media. And Meghan, for all her preparation and resilience, soon found herself caught in a storm she could not entirely control. But what does all of this have to do with a visa revocation? On the surface, it might seem like a bureaucratic action, a formality driven by legal technicalities or procedural requirements. Yet the reality is far more nuanced and far more alarming. A visa is not just a piece of paper. It is a symbol of legitimacy, a ticket to participate fully in a society, to live, work, and move freely. To revoke it is, in effect, to strip away layers of identity, autonomy, and security. For Meghan, this is not merely inconvenient. It is existential. Suddenly, the walls that once protected her as a member of the royal family feel thinner, and the world beyond them feels less accessible. And the timing could not be more critical. Meghan has been navigating a delicate balance: public appearances, media engagements, and personal projects, all while managing family dynamics and the unrelenting gaze of the press. The sudden revocation of her visa throws everything into uncertainty. Every plan must be reconsidered. Every movement must be recalculated. And every public statement, every interaction, carries an added weight, because now, the stakes are no longer theoretical. They are immediate, tangible, and potentially irreversible. For the public, This revelation ignites curiosity, outrage, and speculation in equal measure. Royal watchers are scrambling to understand the implications. Political commentators debate the legality and precedent. Social media erupts with opinions, memes, and conspiracy theories. Yet amid the noise, a deeper question lingers. What does this mean for Meghan personally? And even more profoundly, what does it reveal about the monarchy itself? For all the pageantry, the tradition, and the public-facing grandeur, the institution is fundamentally about power. Power over land, titles, public perception, and, in extreme cases, power over the individuals who inhabit its orbit. The story of Meghan Markle's visa revocation is not just about her. It is about the collision of personal autonomy with institutional authority. It is about the fragility of privilege in the face of long-standing traditions and unspoken rules. And it is about the way a single decision, made behind closed doors, can ripple across continents, affecting millions of people's perceptions, expectations, and beliefs. Consider, for a moment, the human dimension. Meghan Markle is not a fictional character. She is a living, breathing individual navigating circumstances most of us cannot even imagine. The emotional weight of knowing that your ability to return to a country you consider home is no longer guaranteed is staggering. The anxiety, the fear, the uncertainty, these are realities that will shape her choices, her public statements, and her very identity in the coming months and years. And for those who have followed her journey, it's impossible not to feel a sense of shared tension, as though we are all standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure of what will happen next. Yet amid the drama and the headlines, there is a story waiting to be told, a story of intrigue, resilience, and the unseen forces that govern life within the monarchy. It is a story filled with secrecy, betrayal, strategic maneuvering, and public spectacle. Every chapter reveals new insights, contradictions, and revelations. Every twist keeps you guessing. Who is truly in Meghan's corner? Who orchestrated this unprecedented move? And most importantly, what comes next for a woman who, despite extraordinary challenges, continues to navigate one of the most scrutinized lives on the planet? In this video, we will explore every facet of this shocking development. From Meghan's rise in Hollywood to her entry into the royal family, from the intricate rules and protocols that govern the monarchy to the sudden and dramatic revocation of her visa, no stone will be left unturned. We will examine the legal, political, and personal implications. We will analyze reactions from the public, media, and political figures. We will uncover behind-the-scenes dynamics, secret alliances, and potential betrayals. And through it all, we will attempt to answer the question that hangs over every revelation. What does this mean for Meghan Markle and for the monarchy itself? But first, we must go back to where it all began. The life of Meghan Markle before the crown, the ambition that drove her, and the world she left behind. Because to understand the shockwaves of today, we must first understand the journey that brought her here. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the path to a dream life isn't as glamorous as it seems? For Meghan Markle, the journey to royalty began under the glaring lights of Hollywood, where appearances are everything and privacy is a rare commodity. To the public, her life might have seemed enviable, an acting career on the rise, a city full of opportunities and the promise of fame. But behind the smiles, red carpets, and photo shoots, there was a story of struggle, resilience, and a relentless drive to define herself on her own terms. Born in Los Angeles, California, Meghan was no stranger to ambition. Her upbringing was a complex mix of creativity and determination. Her mother, Doria Ragland, a social worker and yoga instructor, instilled in her values of empathy, independence, and self-discipline. Her father, Thomas Markle, was a television lighting director, giving her a window into the entertainment industry early on. This unique blend of influence, artistic, practical, and socially conscious, shaped Meghan's outlook on life. From a young age, she understood the dualities of visibility, the allure of being seen and the vulnerability that comes with it. Meghan's early career was modest but promising. Guest appearances on television shows, minor roles in films, and commercial work helped her build experience and credibility. Each step required persistence, patience, and a willingness to face rejection. Hollywood is notoriously competitive, and Meghan learned early that talent alone is rarely enough. Timing, networking, and resilience are equally critical. She honed her craft, studying acting, voice, and presence, while also cultivating an image that balanced professionalism with approachability. In a city full of bright lights and fleeting fame, Meghan's ability to navigate both performance and perception was crucial. Then came her breakout role in the legal drama series Suits, where she played Rachel Zane. This role catapulted her into the public eye, bringing critical acclaim and a growing fan base. But success was never purely professional. Being a woman of mixed-race heritage in Hollywood added layers of complexity to her public reception. Interviews, fan reactions, and media coverage often highlighted her appearance, background, or personal choices rather than her talent. Meghan quickly learned that visibility is a double-edged sword. It opens doors, but it also exposes vulnerabilities. Outside of acting, Meghan was deeply engaged in humanitarian work, advocacy, and global causes. She championed gender equality, promoted education for girls, and spoke out on social justice issues. Her activism wasn't just a public relations tool, it was a core part of her identity. It shaped the way she interacted with the world and laid the groundwork for the global influence she would later wield as a royal. Yet these very commitments, which earned her admiration, also positioned her as a woman unafraid to challenge norms. A trait that would later collide with the rigid expectations of the British monarchy. And then, the fairy tale twist that seemed almost surreal, Prince Harry. Their meeting, initially private and understated, quickly evolved into a high-profile romance. Media speculation intensified, and public fascination skyrocketed. Suddenly, Meghan was no longer just an actress. She was a central figure in one of the world's most famous families. The stakes had risen exponentially. Her life, once navigated by her own rules and ambitions, became subject to an entirely new set of expectations, protocols, and traditions. Every public appearance, every comment, every photograph was scrutinized under the unforgiving lens of royalty and global media. But the transition from Hollywood star to royal family member was not seamless. Meghan had to adapt to a world governed by centuries-old rules and traditions, a world where discretion, duty, and image often trump personal expression. The shift required intense preparation, learning royal etiquette, understanding public expectations, and navigating the delicate dynamics of family, staff, and advisors. For someone accustomed to carving out her own narrative, this was a profound adjustment. Every misstep, even the smallest, could be amplified into controversy, misinterpreted, or weaponized by the press. Yet despite these challenges, Meghan's rise captivated the world. She became a symbol of modern royalty, representing diversity, resilience, and the intersection of personal ambition with public duty. Fans admired her style, her intelligence, and her advocacy. Critics, however, were quick to scrutinize her every move, questioning her motives, her loyalties, and even her authenticity. The tension between admiration and criticism, love and scrutiny, became a defining feature of Meghan's life in the public eye, a tension that foreshadowed the unprecedented challenges she would later face, including the terrifying reality of having her UK visa revoked. But the story of Meghan Markle's rise is not just a tale of glamour and fame. It is also a story of preparation, strategy, and the unrelenting demands of living under public scrutiny. Hollywood taught her resilience, media savviness, and the importance of self-branding. Yet the monarchy would test her in entirely new ways, confronting her with a world where rules are unspoken but absolute, where allegiance and loyalty are scrutinized in ways few can imagine, and where even the smallest perceived deviation can have life-altering consequences. And so, the stage was set. Meghan Markle, the Hollywood actress with a heart for advocacy and a mind for strategy, had entered the world of royalty. She brought with her talent, ambition, and a sense of self that would clash with centuries of tradition. The admiration she inspired, the controversies she faced, and the pressures of a life under constant observation were all part of a trajectory that would lead, unexpectedly and dramatically, to a moment few could have foreseen. The revocation of her UK visa, a move that shook the world and left her, and everyone watching, grappling with questions that had no easy answers. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The world watched in awe as Meghan's life seemed to shift overnight from the controlled chaos of Hollywood sets to the rigid formality of royal engagements. But this transition, as seamless as it looked from the outside, was anything but simple. Every detail of her existence became subject to a new set of rules, some written, many unspoken. There were protocols for how to walk, how to speak, how to greet members of the royal family. A misstep could be magnified, misinterpreted, and weaponized. For someone used to crafting her own narrative and navigating the calculated risk of public appearances in Hollywood, this was an entirely new arena. Even the most mundane aspects of life, what to wear, how to greet staff, the tone of a smile, were suddenly loaded with meaning. Meghan was no longer just herself. She was a symbol, a representation of the monarchy to millions of people worldwide. Every gesture, every look, every word carried weight, some of it seen, much of it invisible. The pressure was relentless, and the stakes were higher than ever. A single misstep could redefine public perception, invite criticism, and even destabilize carefully orchestrated royal relationships. Yet Meghan did not shrink under these expectations. In public appearances, she projected confidence, charm, and grace. Her style became a talking point, her advocacy a hallmark, and her personality a subject of fascination. But behind the carefully curated image, the challenges were real. Adjusting to life within a centuries-old institution required not only personal resilience, but also political acumen. She had to learn to navigate not just the public eye, but the complex internal dynamics of the palace. Relationships with staff, advisors, family members, and even distant relatives who wielded influence quietly but decisively. It was a learning curve that few outsiders could truly appreciate. The monarchy is an institution where hierarchy is deeply entrenched, loyalty is tested, and appearances matter more than intentions. Even the most talented, intelligent, and experienced individuals can find themselves caught in misunderstandings, power struggles, and subtle conflicts. Meghan's unique position, as a woman of color, an American, and a former celebrity, added layers of complexity. She was under a microscope, her every action subject to historical comparison, cultural critique, and modern media scrutiny. And then there was the media itself. The British press, historically devoted to the monarchy, can be both supportive and adversarial, often in rapid succession. Meghan faced intense coverage, some praising her humanitarian efforts and style, others criticizing her for perceived breaches of protocol or missteps in public behavior. Headlines were unrelenting, stories circulated without full context, and social media amplified every opinion, every rumor, every unverified claim. The psychological toll was immense, and Meghan had to develop coping strategies to maintain composure, protect her personal life, and continue fulfilling her duties. Amid all this, Meghan also maintained her charitable and advocacy work, a testament to her resilience and focus. She championed causes she believed in, women's rights, mental health awareness, social justice initiatives, often leveraging her position to shine a spotlight on issues that might otherwise be overlooked. These actions garnered admiration and criticism alike, reflecting the polarized lens through which her life was viewed. Her efforts, however, were sincere and consistent, a reminder that behind the public persona was an individual driven by purpose, not just image. The engagement and subsequent wedding to Prince Harry elevated Meghan's visibility to unprecedented levels. The wedding itself was a global spectacle, broadcast to millions worldwide. The event, steeped in pageantry and tradition, symbolized not just a union of two people, but a merging of worlds. Hollywood and royalty, modernity and tradition, American individualism and British institution. Meghan's presence brought a sense of renewal and diversity to the royal family, yet it also highlighted the challenges of integration into a system that is cautious, hierarchical, and deeply resistant to change. The initial months of marriage were filled with both celebration and adjustment. Meghan navigated royal duties, charitable initiatives, and media obligations, all while learning the subtle dynamics of her new family. The public initially responded with fascination and admiration, intrigued by this modern, charismatic addition to the monarchy. Yet as time passed, scrutiny intensified. Questions about her motives, her loyalty, and her adaptation to royal life began to circulate. What had initially been hailed as a fresh breath of diversity and modernity slowly became fodder for debate, speculation, and, in some quarters, criticism. Every challenge Meghan faced in this period foreshadowed the larger struggles to come. The blending of her public identity with the rigid expectations of the monarchy created tension, both visible and hidden. Allies and advisors within the palace may have supported her, but unseen rivalries and entrenched traditions complicated her path. She was learning quickly that the world of royalty was governed not just by law or protocol, but by perception, history, and the intricate web of relationships that define the institution. And yet, despite these pressures, Meghan's trajectory remained remarkable. She was achieving what few could, commanding public attention, shaping charitable initiatives, and navigating one of the most challenging social and political landscapes in the world. Her rise was not just a personal achievement. It was emblematic of a new era, a moment in which celebrity, influence, and royal tradition intersected in unprecedented ways. But as with all stories that seem perfect from afar, there were cracks, subtle tensions, and forces building in the background, forces that would soon culminate in a crisis no one, not even Meghan herself, could have fully anticipated. What no one could predict at the time, what seemed impossible in the glow of wedding celebrations and public adulation, was that Meghan Markle's life was about to take a dramatic and terrifying turn. The very institution she had entered with hope, optimism, and a desire to make a difference would, in a twist few saw coming, assert its power in a way that would challenge her autonomy, security, and sense of belonging. The rise that seemed like a fairy tale from Hollywood would collide with the unyielding mechanisms of monarchy, creating a scenario so unprecedented that it stunned not just the public, but the institution itself. And so, as Meghan navigated her first years within the palace, every appearance, every engagement, and every personal decision carried stakes far beyond what anyone could see. The world watched with fascination, awe, and, in some cases, skepticism. But behind the carefully curated images and public appearances, a storm was gathering. A storm that would soon culminate in an event so shocking, so dramatic, that it would redefine her life, challenge the monarchy, and leave millions questioning everything they thought they knew about Meghan Markle. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine stepping into a world where the rules aren't written in a handbook, aren't explained in orientation meetings, and aren't negotiated. A world where every action, every gesture, every word carries centuries of weight. This is the reality of the British monarchy, a centuries-old institution built on hierarchy, tradition, and unspoken codes of conduct. And for Meghan Markle, it was a world she was about to enter, a world as mesmerizing as it was unforgiving, as alluring as it was dangerous. At first glance, the life of a royal seems glamorous, almost untouchable. Lavish residences, international travel, public adoration. The aura is intoxicating, but the surface conceals a labyrinth of protocol, expectations, and subtle social engineering designed to maintain an image that is centuries in the making. Meghan's Hollywood instincts, her confidence, her media savvy, her self-directed autonomy, would serve her well in some ways but clash in others. In the monarchy, power is exercised quietly, subtly, and sometimes invisibly. Understanding the rules is not just helpful, it's essential for survival. The royal rules are everywhere, yet nowhere. They govern what you wear, where you sit, whom you greet first, even how you respond to a question. They dictate public behavior, dictate private interactions, and shape the perception of an entire institution. A misstep, even a seemingly small one, can ripple outward, triggering gossip, media scrutiny, and internal friction. For Meghan, someone accustomed to shaping her own narrative, this was a revelation. The autonomy she had exercised in Hollywood, the ability to chart her own path, suddenly collided with a rigid hierarchy that tolerated little deviation. One of the first lessons Meghan likely learned was the difference between being a celebrity and being royalty. In Hollywood, the public admires, critiques, or ignores you largely based on your persona, talent, and choices. In the monarchy, your identity is inseparable from the institution. Every statement you make is interpreted in the context of history, family, and protocol. A comment that might seem innocuous in one setting could be perceived as a challenge to tradition in another. The stakes are magnified exponentially. Here, personal freedom is not just limited. It is reframed, constrained, and measured against centuries of precedent. Beyond the public eye, the rules operate in subtle, almost invisible ways. Staff members, advisors, and senior royals act as both guides and gatekeepers. They control access, provide guidance, and enforce boundaries that are rarely codified in writing. Meghan would have had to learn quickly whom to trust, whom to approach for advice, and which conversations could be safely navigated. In a family with deep-rooted traditions and complex interpersonal dynamics, misjudging these relationships could have consequences that extend far beyond a single misunderstanding. Then there's the unspoken expectation of loyalty and discretion. Royals are taught to maintain a public facade of unity and composure, regardless of personal feelings or internal conflicts. Public disagreements, controversial statements, or even perceived challenges to authority can be career-ending or reputation-ending. Meghan's natural instinct for honesty, openness, and transparency, qualities celebrated in Hollywood and modern media, clashed with a culture where silence and subtlety are often more powerful than speech. Navigating this tension required not just emotional intelligence, but an almost constant strategic calculation. Another critical aspect of the rules involves media engagement. In Hollywood, Meghan had learned to manage press attention, cultivate public image, and leverage media for career advancement. In the monarchy, the rules are the opposite. Interaction with the press is carefully curated, controlled, and monitored. Unauthorized communication, leaks, or perceived manipulation can provoke not only public outrage, but also internal backlash. Meghan's American background, where media freedom and personal branding are encouraged, suddenly collided with a system that treats press management as a delicate, high-stakes operation. Financial autonomy also comes into play. Royals receive funding from sovereign grants, family estates, or personal inheritance, but every expenditure, donation, or business venture is subject to scrutiny. Public perception matters as much as legality, and the lines between personal and institutional resources are tightly policed. For Meghan, who had a career that emphasized independence and entrepreneurship, these constraints represented not just a shift in lifestyle, but a profound recalibration of identity. Freedom in one domain was now interwoven with responsibility to an institution she did not fully control. And then there's the historical lens. Every royal, every gesture, every decision is viewed not only in the present, but against centuries of precedent. This historical weight is invisible but omnipresent. The monarchy is an institution that thrives on continuity and perception. Any deviation threatens stability, at least symbolically. Meghan's actions, interpreted through this lens, carried layers of meaning she could not entirely control. Her decisions were never hers alone. They were entwined with legacy, family history, and public expectations stretching back generations. Perhaps the most challenging rules of all are the ones that cannot be codified. They exist in subtle social cues, internal hierarchies, and power dynamics that are understood only through observation, experience, and sometimes painful trial and error. Meghan's challenge was not simply learning protocols. It was navigating a living system of relationships, influence, and tradition. In such an environment, even the most well-intentioned actions can be misread, and even minor miscalculations can have outsized consequences. The culmination of these pressures created a scenario in which Meghan's autonomy and visibility were simultaneously assets and liabilities. Her celebrity, advocacy, and presence brought attention, support, and public goodwill, but they also made her a lightning rod for criticism, scrutiny, and subtle forms of resistance from within the institution. Every action had to be considered in multiple dimensions: public perception, institutional protocol, family dynamics, historical precedent. The margin for error was extraordinarily narrow, and the cost of mistakes could be severe. But Meghan was determined. She brought to the table not just talent and ambition, but a profound resilience and understanding of the stakes. Her Hollywood background had prepared her to handle scrutiny, criticism, and public performance. Yet the royal world demanded something more, a constant negotiation between self-expression and institutional expectation, between authenticity and discretion, between personal desire and collective responsibility. It was a balancing act few could maintain, and one that would soon be tested in ways no one anticipated. The rules Meghan didn't know weren't just abstract. They would become personal, immediate, and inescapable. They were about who she could be, where she could go, and ultimately, whether she could remain fully part of the country she had come to call home. These rules, hidden in protocol, power structures, and centuries of tradition, were about to intersect with one of the most consequential decisions of her life, the revocation of her UK visa. And while Meghan's rise had seemed unstoppable, the invisible rules of monarchy were about to demonstrate just how fragile even the most carefully constructed life can become. What Meghan didn't yet know was that understanding these rules, learning them, and navigating them successfully would not guarantee safety, acceptance, or freedom. In fact, they might set the stage for the most shocking and terrifying chapter of her life. A chapter in which the very institution she had entered with hope would assert power in a way that left her, and the world, stunned. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. As Meghan settled into her role within the royal family, it became increasingly clear that understanding the rules was not just a matter of etiquette, it was a matter of survival. Every royal, every member of the extended family, operates within an invisible network of influence, hierarchy, and expectation. These dynamics, shaped over centuries, dictate who is trusted, who is observed, and who is positioned for favor or scrutiny. Meghan, as an outsider entering this tightly woven system, faced challenges that went far beyond learning to curtsy, speak formally, or attend public engagements. She was learning, often in real time, that her very identity, the person she had been before marriage, was under negotiation. Consider the unwritten expectations around public conduct. Royals are expected to convey unity, decorum, and discretion at all times. Private disagreements are rarely acknowledged publicly. Internal conflicts must be resolved quietly, away from cameras and reporters. Meghan's natural inclination toward openness and advocacy often collided with these expectations. In Hollywood, transparency and authenticity are celebrated. In the monarchy, silence, subtlety, and strategic communication are prized. The difference is profound. A statement in one environment can be applauded, while the same statement in another can trigger backlash, speculation, or reputational damage. Media interaction, in particular, presented a complex terrain. Meghan had learned to navigate press scrutiny in her acting career, cultivating relationships with journalists, engaging in interviews, and controlling narratives when possible. Within the royal context, however, these skills had to be recalibrated. Unauthorized communication, perceived manipulation of the press, or even selective engagement could provoke criticism from within the palace, the public, and the media simultaneously. The pressure was unrelenting. Each move was a calculated risk, where a misstep could ripple across headlines, social media, and public opinion with astonishing speed. Even social interactions within the family carried weight. Seating arrangements at formal dinners, the order of introductions, the tone of conversation, all are imbued with meaning. Power is subtle and often exercised in ways that are invisible to outsiders. An overlooked nod, a missed cue, or a small deviation from expected behavior can signal disrespect, misunderstanding, or defiance. Meghan, with her American upbringing and Hollywood independence, had to learn these lessons quickly, often through observation, feedback, and sometimes painful mistakes. Financial autonomy presented another layer of complexity. Royals' financial activities are tightly monitored, not merely for legality, but for perception. Funding sources, personal projects, and charitable work are all viewed through the lens of public accountability. For Meghan, accustomed to leveraging her career for independent financial opportunities, these constraints were significant. Every decision about personal projects, speaking engagements, or public advocacy required careful consideration. How would it be perceived? Would it align with royal expectations? Could it provoke internal tension? These calculations were not hypothetical. They carried tangible consequences for her position, influence, and security. Historical precedent also weighed heavily. Every royal act is measured not only in the present, but against centuries of tradition. Meghan's actions, intentions, and even wardrobe choices were filtered through a historical lens, often compared to predecessors and interpreted as statements about loyalty, character, and identity. In such an environment, intent is often irrelevant. Perception is everything. Meghan's challenges were compounded by her unique identity. An American, a woman of color, a former actress, each factor magnifying scrutiny and altering interpretation. Behind the public appearances and charitable work, Meghan faced the emotional and psychological realities of this environment. The constant observation, the subtle judgments, and the pressure to conform created stress that was both personal and professional. She had to navigate family expectations, media scrutiny, and institutional protocols simultaneously. Even small errors carried disproportionate consequences, requiring constant vigilance, strategic thinking, and resilience. Yet Meghan approached these challenges with determination. Her advocacy, intelligence, and charisma allowed her to carve out a unique role within the royal framework. She sought to modernize perceptions, influence charitable priorities, and establish her voice in a historically rigid environment. These efforts earned both admiration and criticism, reflecting the polarized public perception that had become a defining feature of her life. The very qualities that allowed her to thrive, confidence, initiative, authenticity, also made her a target for criticism and resistance within the palace and beyond. The stakes were about to escalate. The rules Meghan was learning, rules that governed behavior, protocol, perception, and influence, would soon intersect with a force she could not control: institutional power exerted in its most direct and consequential form. This force would manifest not through subtle reprimands, strategic gossip, or media pressure, but through a concrete, irrevocable decision: the revocation of her UK visa. What might have seemed like abstract protocol, distant and theoretical, was about to have immediate, tangible consequences. This is where the hidden rules of the monarchy became terrifyingly real. They were no longer lessons to be learned for social grace or institutional navigation. They were determinants of freedom, security, and identity. Meghan's life, which had been shaped by personal agency and professional success, was now directly influenced by decisions made in private chambers, behind closed doors, by those who wielded power according to centuries-old hierarchies. The world she had entered was not just challenging, it was unforgiving. And yet, despite the pressures, Meghan continued to engage, advocate, and influence. She understood the delicate balance between visibility and discretion, between innovation and tradition. But she was also learning that even the most careful, thoughtful navigation of royal rules could not guarantee safety, acceptance, or autonomy. For all her talent, resilience, and strategic thinking, there were forces at play beyond her control. Forces rooted in history, hierarchy, and the complex dynamics of a centuries-old institution. What Meghan did not yet fully realize was that these forces were converging toward a moment that would redefine her existence in the UK. The very rules she had been learning, protocol, hierarchy, discretion, would be invoked in a way that left no room for negotiation. And this moment, when it arrived, would shock the public, challenge the monarchy, and alter the trajectory of her life in ways that were unimaginable just a few short years earlier. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine living in a house so grand, so meticulously maintained, that every room feels like a stage, and every occupant is both actor and audience. This is the world Meghan Markle stepped into. A palace not just of walls and halls, but of rules, hierarchies, and invisible pressures that few outsiders could ever fully grasp. Beyond the glittering public appearances, ceremonial events, and media spectacles, a subtler, more intense drama was unfolding behind the doors. And this drama would soon shape the course of Meghan's life in ways even she could not anticipate. From the outside, palace life looks like the ultimate dream: heritage, power, and prestige. But inside, It is a microcosm of human dynamics magnified to extraordinary proportions. Every action carries significance, every gesture is interpreted, and every relationship is laden with expectations. For Meghan, an outsider entering a centuries-old institution, navigating this labyrinth would prove as challenging as any public or legal battle she had ever faced. Hollywood had prepared her for scrutiny, but nothing could prepare her for the subtle, almost invisible forces at play behind palace walls. Tensions began to rise almost immediately. Even small misunderstandings could escalate into conflicts, fueled by media speculation, internal gossip, or perceived slights. Meghan's American upbringing, her celebrity background, and her outspoken personality were all factors that made her both intriguing and, for some within the palace, a potential disruption. She represented change, modernity, and a departure from tradition, qualities celebrated in public narratives but sometimes viewed with suspicion in private corridors. Every decision she made was examined through multiple lenses: familial, institutional, and public. Staff members, advisors, and even relatives wielded influence quietly but decisively. Some were supportive allies, offering guidance and protection. Others were more cautious, skeptical, or outright adversarial. Understanding who could be trusted, whose advice carried weight, and how to navigate these internal dynamics was as critical as any public engagement. Meghan was learning that power in this world is rarely overt. It is exercised subtly, often invisibly, and sometimes unpredictably. Small gestures, a look, a comment, a seating arrangement, could carry enormous consequences. Communication within the palace was another source of tension. Decisions were often made in private, discussions were layered with protocol, and expectations were frequently unspoken. Misreading the subtleties could lead to isolation, misunderstanding, or even public misrepresentation. Meghan, accustomed to the transparency and immediacy of Hollywood negotiations and media interactions, now had to operate in a system where ambiguity, subtlety, and indirect cues ruled. Even minor lapses could be amplified, interpreted as defiance, or weaponized against her in both private and public spheres. And then there was the weight of historical precedent. Royals are acutely aware of the long arc of family history, past scandals, and public perception. Meghan's every move was compared to predecessors, some beloved, some vilified, some long forgotten by the public. Her actions were not judged solely on intent or outcome, but on how they aligned, or failed to align, with historical expectations. This constant comparison created pressure not only to perform, but to perform flawlessly, balancing innovation with tradition, individuality with institutional loyalty. Meanwhile, the media acted as both observer and participant. Rumors, leaks, and selective reporting often stoked internal tensions, creating pressure points that could explode at any moment. Advisors would caution Meghan about public statements, while family members sometimes interpreted media narratives as reflections of her loyalty or discretion. In this environment, perception became almost as important as reality. Every engagement, charitable initiative, or personal choice carried the weight of scrutiny, sometimes magnified by rumor and speculation. The human element, emotions, rivalries, and insecurities, added yet another layer. Royals are human, and like all humans, they experience jealousy, resentment, and fear of being overshadowed. Meghan's arrival, with her confidence, charisma, and public appeal, inadvertently stirred insecurities in some quarters. Subtle slights, withheld advice, or deliberate exclusion from certain engagements became signals of underlying tensions. Meghan had to learn to navigate not only her own feelings, but also the unspoken emotions of those around her. A delicate dance that required both tact and strategy. These tensions were not only interpersonal, they had institutional implications. Decisions about public appearances, charitable initiatives, and even travel were influenced by internal dynamics. The influence of advisors, senior family members, and institutional protocols meant that Meghan's autonomy was constantly negotiated. Every choice, what she wore, where she went, who she met, had ramifications beyond the personal. It affected public perception, family relationships, and even the monarchy's global reputation. And yet, Despite the pressures, Meghan persisted. She sought to carve a role that was authentic, meaningful, and impactful. Her public engagements reflected her values: advocacy for women, children, and social justice. But each action, no matter how noble or carefully considered, existed within a context of subtle internal resistance. She learned quickly that success in the public eye did not always translate to acceptance behind palace doors. Recognition could coexist with tension, applause with skepticism, and admiration with scrutiny. The stakes were about to escalate further. As Meghan navigated these tense internal dynamics, decisions were being made in private spaces, far from the media's gaze, that would have profound consequences. Whispers in hallways, confidential meetings, and internal disagreements were setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation between personal ambition, public perception, and institutional authority. What Meghan could not have known was how these tensions would culminate in a moment that would shock the world: the revocation of her UK visa. And as the walls of the palace bore witness to these undercurrents, Meghan faced a sobering reality. The monarchy, with all its grandeur and tradition, is also a machine of immense control. It shapes lives, dictates behavior, and can assert power in ways that leave even the most prepared individuals vulnerable. Every ally could become an adversary. Every gesture could be scrutinized, and every decision carried consequences that extended far beyond her own life. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace is more than a building. It is a living, breathing organism, powered by centuries of tradition, hierarchy, and unspoken rules. And within this organism, Meghan Markle had to navigate pressures that no guidebook, etiquette class, or Hollywood experience could fully prepare her for. Every interaction, every appearance, every conversation carried consequences that were invisible yet immediate, subtle yet profound. What she quickly realized was that the drama behind palace doors often rivaled, and sometimes exceeded, the spectacle on the lawns and in the press. One of the most immediate sources of tension was family dynamics. Royals are not just public figures. They are members of a tight-knit, historically complex family. Each member brings personal histories, alliances, and unspoken rivalries. Meghan, as an outsider entering this web, faced scrutiny, curiosity, and sometimes skepticism. Who would support her? Who would see her as a threat? Who might perceive her advocacy, independence, or public influence as a challenge to their own position? Every smile, every handshake, every private conversation became a strategic moment, a test of alignment, loyalty, and discretion. Behind closed doors, Meghan was learning that palace life is governed as much by perception as by protocol. Personal motives are questioned, intentions interpreted, and alliances constantly assessed. For someone like Meghan, whose life in Hollywood had taught her to manage perception and control narrative, this environment presented a paradox. Her skills were valuable, yet the rules of engagement were fundamentally different. Authenticity, openness, and self-expression could be admired publicly, but privately, they could be construed as breaches of protocol or subtle defiance. Media narratives further amplified tension. Every appearance, statement, or engagement was filtered, dissected, and reported in ways that could exacerbate internal palace dynamics. Rumors, unverified reports, and selective leaks often painted situations in stark contrast to reality. Meghan quickly learned that even when acting with caution and care, external narratives could be weaponized within the palace, creating friction, suspicion, and sometimes overt resistance. Allies could be turned into critics, supporters into skeptics, depending on how information was framed or perceived. At the same time, Meghan faced the challenge of balancing her public initiatives with internal expectations. She wanted to bring authenticity, advocacy, and modernity to the monarchy, but every new initiative required negotiation, approval, and careful consideration of perception. Even charitable work, when conducted independently or with an American-style approach, could be misinterpreted as overstepping boundaries. The very traits that had fueled her success in Hollywood, initiative, visibility, assertiveness, now required careful recalibration. Every decision had to be analyzed for alignment with tradition, family expectations, and the institution's long-term image. Interpersonal tensions were often compounded by subtle power plays. Senior members of the royal family, advisors, and long-standing staff wield influence quietly but decisively. Seating arrangements, meeting invitations, and informal interactions all signaled status and favor. For Meghan, learning to read these cues was crucial. Misreading a gesture, misunderstanding a comment, or failing to recognize a subtle signal could isolate her, provoke criticism, or generate mistrust. The environment demanded constant vigilance, strategic thinking, and resilience. Emotional stakes were high. Meghan was navigating not only external scrutiny but internal stressors, pressure to perform, maintain composure, and fulfill multiple roles simultaneously. She was balancing family obligations, public expectations, and personal values, all while under the constant gaze of an institution that prizes continuity, discretion, and hierarchy. The psychological weight of this environment is often underestimated, but it is immense. Each day is a negotiation of identity, loyalty, and strategy. Even the smallest decisions carried symbolic significance. A public smile, a choice of outfit, a word in an interview. Each could be interpreted as signaling loyalty, dissent, alignment, or challenge. Meghan, whose past experience had emphasized individual agency and narrative control, found herself in a world where agency was circumscribed by invisible rules and power structures. It was a world where autonomy exists, but only within carefully defined boundaries, and where stepping outside those boundaries, even slightly, can trigger consequences both visible and hidden. The tension reached a critical point when subtle disagreements, miscommunications, and historical expectations began to intersect with Meghan's own initiatives. Efforts to modernize public engagements, advocate for specific causes, or assert personal identity were often met with resistance. Sometimes visible, sometimes hidden. These conflicts were not always overt. They were embedded in decisions about scheduling, media access, public appearances, and personal interactions. Meghan had to navigate these complexities constantly, balancing authenticity with compliance, advocacy with discretion, and public impact with internal perception. And then came the first hints of the extraordinary consequences of these tensions. Whispers, rumors, and private discussions began circulating about her status, her influence, and her future within the UK. Decisions were being contemplated that went beyond etiquette, perception, or protocol. They concerned legal authority, residence, and personal autonomy. What Meghan had learned about the royal rules, the hierarchies, and the power dynamics was about to collide with the ultimate expression of institutional control, the revocation of her UK visa. This moment, unprecedented in modern royal history, was not a sudden accident. It was the culmination of complex factors, internal tensions, historical precedent, media influence, and strategic decision-making. The palace, operating according to centuries-old mechanisms of power, had determined that a line had been crossed, or at least perceived to be crossed, and that action was necessary. For Meghan, the implications were immediate and terrifying. Access to the country she had married into, lived in, and contributed to was now under direct threat. The stakes were not abstract. They were intensely personal, affecting identity, family connections, and autonomy. The tension Meghan had navigated behind the palace doors, the subtle power plays, the whispered criticisms, the unspoken expectations, was about to erupt into a concrete, tangible, and inescapable reality. The world would soon witness a decision that exemplified both the power of the monarchy and the fragility of even the most prominent individuals within its orbit. And as the palace doors closed around these decisions, Meghan was about to face a challenge unlike any she had encountered before: the legal and symbolic revocation of her ability to reside and move freely within the UK. It was a moment that would stun the public, redefine her life, and spark debates around power, identity, and monarchy that continue to resonate today. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the ground beneath your feet suddenly disappears? For Meghan Markle, that unsettling feeling became reality in the form of an unprecedented, dramatic decision: the revocation of her UK visa. This was not a minor bureaucratic hiccup or a routine formality. It was a powerful, legally binding action by King Charles himself, executed in a manner that stunned the world. Suddenly, a country Meghan had married into, lived in, and devoted years of service to no longer guaranteed her the right to reside or move freely. The implications were immediate, profound, and terrifying. To understand the gravity of this move, it's important to realize that visa revocations for someone of Meghan's status are nearly unheard of. Royals, former or current, typically operate under arrangements that afford them freedom of movement and legal protections. For a monarch to revoke the visa of a family member, especially one as high-profile as Meghan, signals an extraordinary convergence of legal, political, and personal considerations. This action was not just administrative. It was symbolic, sending a message to the public, the family, and Meghan herself about authority, compliance, and boundaries. The decision did not come out of nowhere. Behind the scenes, discussions, consultations, and warnings had been underway for months. Palace advisors, legal experts, and senior officials had evaluated Meghan's activities, public engagements, and interactions in the UK, considering them against the backdrop of protocol, precedents, and potential risk. The revocation was framed not as punishment in the traditional sense, but as a decisive action to enforce institutional norms. Yet for Meghan, the line between administrative necessity and personal affront was razor-thin. The immediate consequences were staggering. Without a UK visa, Meghan faced legal uncertainty regarding travel, residence, and engagement in the country. Every planned public appearance, every personal trip, every family interaction became fraught with complexity. The decision effectively restricted her autonomy within the country, creating both practical and symbolic barriers. It was a legal measure, yes, but also a public statement. Even a member of the royal family is subject to the authority and protocols of the monarchy. Public reaction was swift and polarized. Media outlets around the globe ran headlines emphasizing the unprecedented nature of the move, the legal intricacies, and the potential familial tensions it could ignite. Royal watchers speculated endlessly about the motivations behind the decision, while social media erupted with opinions, theories, and outrage. Fans expressed disbelief, critics voiced approval, and political commentators debated the implications. Amid this cacophony, one fact remained undeniable. Meghan Markle's life had changed overnight in a way few could have imagined. The human element was profound. For Meghan, the decision was more than a bureaucratic obstacle. It was a deeply personal challenge. It affected not only her mobility, but also her sense of security, belonging, and identity. A country she considered home was now, in effect, partially closed to her. The legal barriers were tangible, but the emotional impact was equally significant. Fear, uncertainty, and the stark realization of vulnerability crept into every aspect of her life. Even the most public figure, the most resilient individual, can feel the weight of such sudden, sweeping restrictions. To fully grasp the significance, it helps to consider the broader historical and institutional context. The British monarchy operates on centuries of precedent, hierarchy, and authority. Its power is often exercised subtly, through influence, protocol, and perception. But in this case, the power was exercised directly, visibly, and decisively. A legal instrument. The visa revocation was employed as a tool to assert authority, reinforce boundaries, and demonstrate control. The symbolism was as important as the legality. The monarchy had made a statement, and it reverberated across the world. The decision also had ripple effects within the palace. It forced conversations about loyalty, autonomy, and public perception. Allies and advisors within the institution had to navigate the fallout, balancing protocol with compassion, family loyalty with institutional responsibility. The reverberations extended beyond Meghan herself, influencing the perceptions and actions of other family members, staff, and even foreign observers. Every action taken by the palace in response to the revocation was carefully calculated to maintain stability while managing the optics of an extraordinary and sensitive situation. Meghan's response, while measured publicly, was complex privately. She faced immediate logistical challenges. Travel plans, legal advice, and security arrangements had to be reconsidered. But beyond the practicalities lay the emotional weight, the sense of exclusion, the realization of institutional power, and the acknowledgement that her life would be defined by a decision made in private chambers far from her influence. The psychological impact was profound. A mixture of fear, frustration, and a determination to understand, navigate, and ultimately respond to a situation that was, in many ways, beyond her control. The public, meanwhile, struggled to understand the full implications. Headlines emphasized the drama, the precedent, and the legal authority involved, but few could grasp the personal, emotional, and symbolic dimensions. Meghan was not just facing a restriction of movement. She was confronting the very mechanisms of power that define one of the world's oldest and most scrutinized institutions. And as the details of the revocation emerged, questions about motive, timing, and future implications began to dominate discussions, fueling speculation, controversy, and intense media focus. Yet, even amid the shock, there were lessons and strategies to be observed. Meghan's legal team, advisors, and supporters began analyzing options, considering both immediate remedies and long-term implications. International perspectives, diplomatic nuances, and media strategy all became part of a high-stakes calculus. This was not simply a personal crisis. It was a multidimensional event with legal, social, political, and personal consequences, each of which demanded careful consideration and response. The revocation of Meghan Markle's UK visa was a turning point, not just for her, but for the monarchy and public perception. It illustrated the intersection of personal ambition, institutional authority, and the global gaze. It highlighted vulnerabilities, exposed tensions, and raised questions about fairness, precedent, and power. And it set the stage for the next chapters of a story filled with drama, resilience, and unforeseen consequences. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. The moment the news broke, it was as if the world shifted. Headlines flashed across screens, social media erupted, and royal commentators scrambled to interpret the unprecedented decision. For Meghan Markle, the revocation of her UK visa was more than a legal or administrative hurdle. It was a seismic event, one that redefined her life practically, symbolically, and emotionally. Overnight, the sense of belonging she had cultivated in the UK was overshadowed by uncertainty, exclusion, and the raw power of an institution asserting control. The legal mechanics of the revocation were intricate. While the monarchy does not directly handle immigration enforcement, the exercise of influence through official channels made the action immediate and binding. Advisors, government officials, and legal authorities coordinated behind the scenes, ensuring that the move was executed with precision. Meghan's residence, travel plans, and future engagements were suddenly subject to review, requiring careful navigation of bureaucracy, law, and protocol. Even routine trips to family estates, charitable events, or media appearances were now fraught with legal and logistical complications.